Everybody, it's January 14th, 2022, and this is bringing you a daily devotional for this Friday. Today's readings were Matthew chapter 6, verse 1 to 15, Acts chapter 8, verse 26 to 40, Psalm 14, and then Genesis 32 and 33. If you're joining along with us in those readings, whether it's one track or all four tracks, or just here to be encouraged and edified through His Word today. So I was reading in Psalm 14 today. The first verse is a verse that I came to know as a young boy, and I memorized and remember hearing, and I think I even had it on a T-shirt at one point, that only a fool says in their heart that there is no God. And it goes on to say that they're corrupt, their actions are evil, none of them does good. And remember, that's what we were taught about people who didn't believe in God, that everything about them was evil, that they were foolish. Well, that I've come to learn two things. One, that word foolishness is more about selfishness than it is about intellect. It's like they don't want there to be a God because they're corrupt, because they're evil. They want to do bad things, so they ignore the existence of God. It's not about intellectual doubt. It's not about being foolish in your mind. It's about being foolish in your heart. And that's why David goes on to say, God looks on the entire human race and sees this. The next verses. He doesn't see anybody that's truly wise. He doesn't see anybody really seeking God. They're all corrupt. We've all done evil. Tim Keller says that every sin is a kind of practical atheism. Every time we sin, every time we do something wrong, go against God's will, miss the mark on who we're supposed to be, we essentially are saying in that moment that we are God. There isn't God, there isn't a God, and I just get to do what I want. We're that person in verse 1. We're the fool saying there is no God. I get to decide what to do. I get to decide what's right. This is what we see flourishing in our world. It's what we've always seen flourishing in the world. This isn't something new. This isn't something that just happened. It's the human race. This has happened since the beginning. And what we see in this psalm is that it begins to talk about things like people who are starving, people in terror, people in fear, people who are oppressed. The kind of foolishness that we live out, that foolishness where we every day say, I'm in charge and I decide and I get to do what I want. The kind of foolishness that in our actions every day says there isn't a God, I am God, and I'm in charge, leads to problems and pains and struggles and sin, oppression. It leads to other people being hurt. And each of us needs to begin to examine our hearts. See, atheism isn't something it is an intellectual thing. And I'm not speaking against it or even to it today. What I'm saying is that it is a practical thing. That you can say with your mouth and you can say with your heart every day, all you want. You can say, yes, there's a God and I believe in Him. And I believe that He loves me and I love Him. And that's great that you proclaim that with your mouth. But what do you proclaim with your life? Because so many people who come into a church and say that they believe in Jesus live out something that says that they don't believe, that they believe that they're God, that they believe they're in charge, that they believe they get to write the rules. And their lives don't bring the love and grace and truth that Jesus wants us to bring, that when we give our hearts to Him and we live fully for Him and we live for Him and not for ourselves brings. But instead, we fill our world with this oppression. We fill our world with this pain. We fill our world with the brokenness and heartache and hardships. If we look at what we read in Genesis, we see Jacob and Esau having to mend their relationship, these two brothers, because Jacob has been deceptive, because Jacob has been selfish, because Jacob made these plans to grab a hold of what wasn't his. And God uses that, but it hurt his brother. And he felt justified and he felt right, but he was hurting his brother. And so often you can't see past yourself. You only think and see about what's right for you and what's good for you and what works for you. And it is ingrained within us in our culture and in our world that that's what matters. You do you. You live for you. Nobody else is thinking about you, so that you need to. It's not true. God tells us that he's always thinking about us. We don't need to think about ourselves because we have the one who is thinking about us, who is considering us, who is concentrating on us, and who could give us what we need. And what he needs us to do is to think about others, the others that he's also thinking about, the others that he wants us, who don't see his love and grace and want to find it. In the end, it talks about how God is going to restore his people. He'll end his oppression. He'll make all things new. But we can be a part of that process of restoration now, like Jacob and Esau were able to be restored. Maybe you have some relationships because of your foolishness and how you've lived for yourself. You've hurt them. And maybe the other person has too, but you need to own up to your responsibility in it. Maybe you live some foolishness in your career, your job, at your workplace, and it's hurt people you work with. Maybe there's some foolishness in your family, and these people who are closest to you and who you should be loving and supporting. It's been all about you for so long that they don't even know how to live for themselves anymore. Like you're like the sun and the world revolves around you. Consider that in your hearts today. What kind of foolishness are you living out that's saying, I'm God, I'm in charge, I'm the most important thing? And push that aside and stop hurting the people around you and start letting God restore your relationships. Stop letting God restore your life. Let God make things new in you again today as he promises to do, and all of those who trust in him. Don't be a fool in your heart. Be wise and let God be in charge of your heart.